Hi friends, this is Trish and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today I have a super exciting guest named Chris and he is an amazing person. He is an award-winning teacher, been in the classroom for 25 years, and his list of accomplishments are so long that I'm just going to read you a few, but this guy's amazing. He has earned 3 ambassador awards from the school board. He's co-authored national standards for high school sociology. He's co-authored dual credit sociology program at Loyola University. And he spent 10 years as one of only 2 high school teachers in the nation to be on the American Sociological Association High School Advisory Board. Hopefully I got some of those accomplishments right, Chris.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks.
Definitely. And one really heartwarming fun fact that I learned was that his students loved him so much, he actually was asked to preside over a student's wedding. How cool is that?
Yeah, it was it was so cool. So they met in my class like junior year, senior year. In the class, I actually did a lesson where I paired them up as a married couple. Like the whole class had roles. Like there was, a doctor and an environmental scientist, and then there was like a cheerleader and a football player, and they were married. And that was the first time they had started like talking to each other. And so then 10 years, fast forward 10 years later, they came back to visit and said, guess what? We started dating in your class. We're getting engaged, and she's Jewish. He's Catholic. So it's not going to be a religious wedding, but we met in your class and you played such a meaningful role in our life. Would you be the presider? And I was like, absolutely. Oh my gosh, So it's like validation that, wow, we're really making a difference. You have no idea what 10 years down the road,
Definitely. And that's why I think it's such a big deal that you actually resigned publicly over some of the problems that are happening with standards-based grading. It's also called evidence-based grading. And you really started to feel like this was an immoral practice that was actually unethical. So I would just love for you to tell our audience that maybe is used through the A through F grading system. They were used to the traditional way of grading where you either failed something or you passed something. If you didn't turn something in, then you were kind of in trouble. We've kind of shifted to this wild land of this crazy grading. So can you just kind of introduce people to what that style of grading is like?
Sure. Like you said, the name kind of changes and schools kind of put their own spin on it. So sometimes standards-based grading, proficiency-based grading, and then our school, which likes to kind of brand things and do it their way, called it evidence-based reporting. Like it wasn't grading, it was reporting. And listeners should brace themselves, especially if you're not in education the last couple of years. Like it's hard to imagine. Everybody I talk to outside of education is like, what? So the school said you can only grade students on what your subject matter is asking them to do in the class. So for example, I taught sociology. So I could grade sociology, but that meant I couldn't grade writing. I couldn't grade participation. I couldn't even grade homework. Like you could put a grade in, but it doesn't count for anything. So students don't see it as something, real. You couldn't grade whether a student like did the work, did the reading. And so you could only grade on like, all right, I'm asking you to do these specific things. But even with that, you couldn't grade all of their work. The school said you can only grade the modal score. So in other words, you might have 7 grades. And if 4 of those grades are the highest proficiency level, that would translate to an A. 3 of those grades could be zeros, or like the kid didn't even do it. Like it's the lowest. And the modal score of that is the highest proficiency level. So you have to give them that. And then on top of that, if that wasn't enough, the school mandated that you must give students opportunities to re-perform, they called it. So even students that are like, not proficient, they have to get an extra chance to turn in assignments. And so it's really kind of a crazy system. And just for clarity, so they said you have to eliminate letter grades. So they got rid of that and went to a 4-3-2-1. But then they said 4-3-2-1 is still too much like a letter. Now, so you have to go to exceeds expectations or standards, meets expectations or meets proficiency, approaches expectations or proficiency, and then still developing proficiency. So those were 4 levels that were kind of qualitative instead of quantitative. But at the end of the semester, you have to translate that into a letter grade. So what was happening is students were like, all right, I have a meets, approaches, exceeds. And students are like, well, I have no idea what that is. What is that? So it was stressful for students and then stressful for teachers. And it wasn't good. And we can get into the details more in a minute.
Well, thanks for that overview. It's so interesting how every school does it different, because my school wasn't even like that organized. Essentially what happened is just one day they decided no assignments count. So homeworks, projects, readings, daily classwork, like literally nothing counted. And they would just have these things called like benchmark tests, and they were like little district tests. And that was the only thing that was in the quote unquote grade book. But then they weren't actual grades. Like you said, they were, like meets or working towards or not meeting. And essentially a student could really have like pretty much all ins for not meeting and go on to the next grade. So it was nearly impossible for a student to fail. And so it was just like such a feat to try to get kids to do anything, because I think it was hard even for us back in the day, like, oh, I have to do my homework, I've got to study. But I just can't even imagine what it would have been like to have no real standards. And then kind of similar to what you were talking about, students could retake their benchmarks if they wanted to. And so sometimes it would be like the same exact test that they could just keep taking. And so it's just so bizarre. What are some of the reasons that they gave to try to sell you on standards-based or evidence-based grading?
Sure. So in theory, like if I explain it the way that admin will explain it, like it sounds good. Like I get it. But then there's the reality. So the theory is that people that are trying to learn stuff, you don't learn it right away. You have to like work at it and try it. And in the long run, if you develop the skills or the proficiency in whatever you're trying to learn, what difference does it make if it took you 2 tests to learn it or 4 tests or like that makes sense, right? So one example is like if you show up to take your driver's test and you fail the driver's test, right? You can show up again and again and again, and you could be a kid that failed it 4 times, but you eventually get your driver's license. And so the school is kind of using that philosophy. The reality is, though, is a student shows up for a driver's test because they want that driver's license. Our students are forced to be in school. And not only are they forced to be in school, they're forced to take subjects in a range of different areas that they may or may not be interested in. And even someone getting a driver's license has to be 16. So there's a certain level of maturity, but we're talking about high school kids that are 14, 15, and kids that are practical. So they know like, oh, look, I've already been accepted into college. Like I had seniors already been accepted into college. I know I'm going, I know I'm going to pass. What's the difference whether I try or not? And if that's the case, then, why are we even mandating high school until, kids graduate, in July or June of their senior year? Why not just mandate it until they get accepted into college and then be done with it? So, and my students told me as much. So this was the thing. They said, when I told them I was leaving, they said, like, I explained my whole story. And they started clapping. And I was like, oh my God, why are they clapping? It's like, are you guys glad I'm leaving? And they're like, no, we agree with you. Thank you so much for going public and putting your letter online, because they said, first of all, it's not fair if I'm a student and I'm trying to get into a college and I turn in everything on time and I do my work and I get an A, and then there's somebody else who turns it in late, but even then doesn't do a good job, and then they get a second or third time to do it and they get an A, and at the end of the year I'm competing with them to get into the same colleges. It just doesn't seem fair, and it's not motivating to me as a student to like, why do I try so hard when everybody else can just sort of slough off and get away with it? So they said that, but then they also said, look, Mr. Sal, I am aware I'm 17 years old and I'm just not going to do the work if I don't have to. If I have other things going on, I mean, there might be prom, or there might be sports, or there might be, you know, things happening in my life, and friends are going out. If the homework isn't like graded, like there's not motivation to do it. Why do it? And so I get it. But the kid said, I know I'm not being prepared for college, but I'm still going to do that anyway because that's the system I'm in. And it's funny because I've always responded to that, to the idea that you set the bar for kids. You tell them what that bar is. You give them clear expectations, and they will get there, you know, and good teachers will help them get there. But what these kids are saying is like, yeah, I know what the bar is, and the bar is set really low. Like, I don't have to do it. I don't have to do the homework. I can just take a test. And even then, if I fail, I get a second chance on the test. So, you know, minimal.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said all those things. So what did that end up looking like for you in your class? I just remember as a teacher, like assigning an essay, and I would be lucky if 30% of the people turned it in. And it was just like me begging and pleading and giving class time. So how did that shake out for you at your school?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like I had always, now, can I back up to your question about why the school was doing it or what they would say? I think there were some classes that students were consistently scoring lower in, and students would say, well, it's because this class gives so much homework. And so the idea was, why is this homework lowering my grade? If I can perform on the test and I demonstrate, look, I know the work, I shouldn't have to do the homework. Okay. Now, so that might have been part of the school's motivation, but that was like a few select classes. And I feel like you should troubleshoot that piecemeal. You know, if that's happening in organic chem, or if it's happening in AP Calc, you know, work with those teachers to figure out a way. But to do some sort of umbrella mandate over everybody in the school, I think didn't make sense. Because prior to this EBR, evidence-based reporting, I was already making allowances for kids that, you know what, they had a bad day, they weren't able to get this assignment in, you know, and so it would be a 0 if they hadn't turned it in, which our school said you can't give anybody a 0 anymore. But I used to say, well, if you don't do it at all, it's a 0. That's an F. But if you do it and it's late, you could still earn 60% or 59%. That's still an F, but that's a really different grade. And so that seemed to work fine. So then when the school said, all right, well, you can't do that anymore. You can only give exceeds, meets, approaches, whatever, and you have to allow them other time. I started getting kids that were just like waiting till the last minute, not doing things. And I tried really hard to make my class practical in a way that made them want to do the work. So in other words, I would say like, look, you're going to have a final paper that's due, let's say May 1st, for example. Throughout the quarter or the term before that, like 6 weeks before that, we will work on everything you need to do to get that paper done. Like we were doing it in class. Like I would tell them, here's how you research. Here's how you write it. And I would say, all right, we're going to spend, half of today, like writing it. And I would circulate and help the kids, create this thing, they would call me over or whatever. Then May 1st rolled around and I had maybe 20 kids out of 80 not turn in the paper. And they were kind of like, well, it's not, is it really due? When is it actually due? And I was like, well, I don't know. Actually, the school says I have to take late work. So I said, how about this? You've got to get to me by the end of the school year. So it's May 1st. So they have an extra 2 weeks, say. In 2 weeks time, I still had 10 kids didn't have it. So they're like, oh, can I get it to you tonight? When is it due? So I said, all right, well, how about get it to me by the day of our final exam, which we didn't have a final exam because the school says you should just do a finals experience. So there's no real final exam. There's no test that you have to give. So our experience is like, come in, do a course evaluation. And then if you're missing something, you could turn it into me. So it's like, all right, show up. So on that day, I still had 3 students who didn't have it. And they're like, well, when can I get this in? And I was like, all right, how about by the very last final exam day, I guess, because that's when I have to turn in grades. I leave for the summer. So now this is like the fourth deadline. And that day I show up, even though I don't have a test, I don't have a period, but I say I will be in this room waiting. And I waited the entire period and then nothing. So I said, now I had winnowed down my class. So there was no homework that kids could rely on to pass them. There was no participation that kids could rely on to pass them. There was no like this amass of points that teachers used to do, prior to this proficiency stuff. So they had like 3 or 4 papers that were essential grades, that we worked on during the semester. So these 3 students did not have any of this last paper. So essentially they're missing a quarter of their entire grade. So I said, all right, I mean that you fail. Like you don't have enough evidence for me to pass you, and if you did it by points, like the math isn't there, no matter how you cut it. So I filled out a failure notice, submitted it to my director, that's like department chair at our school, and I left for the summer. They checked me out, said, okay. And part of the checkout process is you set up your email that says, I will be back in August. So in July, I get a phone call from my director that says, hey, I don't know if you've checked your email over the summer, but these kids are saying they turned in some work and that they shouldn't have failed. And I said, look, and literally I was on vacation. I was, it's a whole nother story. I was in Europe and I had my appendix out, by the way. This is crazy in France. Yeah. But anyway, so I'm like, look, I'm on vacation. I can't do this now. Like it's my summer break. I filled out the form. They didn't have it. He said, well, that's fine. I don't want to disturb your break, but we'll have to talk about it when you come back in August. So I go back in August and he says, did you look at those grades? And I was like, well, yeah, it looks like the kids failed. They didn't have it when it was due. It's pretty cut and dry. And he said, well, and this is new lingo that the district is using. They said, the grade book is telling a different story for each of the kids. So I don't think all 3 kids should have an F, because one kid had done some work prior to this. Another kid had done, maybe half the work. And then the last kid did nothing until the summertime and then turned in everything that they were missing. So he said, I really think each kid's grade, the grade book is telling a different story for each kid's grade. And I was like, if you want to go by the grade book, they were all missing this on the day of the final and then even into the last day. So for me, the story is they missed it. They missed that window of opportunity. And so they failed. And I said, like, when is the end? What's the end deadline? Because if I change it now, what's to stop some other kids from saying, oh, I heard you change their grade in the first week of August. This is the grade for June. What if another kid was like, I ended up with a B+. I'm going to redo it. And since you changed their grade, can I resubmit? Like, when is the end? Like, the grading is like a window of time and that students have performed. So anyway, he sort of pushed me to look at it. I felt pressured and I changed their grades. 3 Fs became a D, a C, and a B. And I felt like this gets admin off my back. That's what they want. And it was stressful for me at the time. So what I thought was this would help me just move on and look to the future. But instead, it was like this lingering feeling of immorality and just bad teaching. I was letting down these students by doing that, by changing that. And so that lingered and festered and it stayed with me over the next several years, which I think led to it becoming even worse. Next couple of years, there was the pandemic. And we had to teach at home. And so we put up with that. We did an amazing job, I think, as teachers. Most of my colleagues and I rose to the occasion. And me specifically, like our school has this student voice survey data, and they give it to all the students. My data was 20 points higher than the average at the school. Like, students said, wow, you really made it tolerable. I appreciated your energy. You helped me get through it. Like, well, praise, So I thought I did a great job. Then we went back to normal teaching. back to this evidence-based reporting and like sort of like that. And I had a semester where I had, again, 20 students not turn in this final paper, and there was 1 week left. And I was so upset. And so I'm emailing my boss, I'm emailing the union president, and I'm emailing the division, like the division director has an assistant who's supposed to help coach you with, here's how to grade with this new system, and et cetera. And there were no answers. There were no answers. What do I do? The kids simply didn't turn it in. And many of them knew it. And the kids walked out of class laughing, like, I'll get it to you later this week. Like it was literally like that. Mm. So I said, this is crazy. It's crazy. So I went into the office. I got upset. I walked in the office, and people are sitting around in the office the next day. No one had emailed me back, but they're sitting around chatting about like personal life. So I was like, there's 1 week left of school. What do I got to do? And I stormed out of the office, and the school wrote me up for storming out of the office. And I said, but look, I didn't just fly off the handle. I had 20 kids not turn in a final paper. And this is after a couple of years ago, I had all those other kids not turn in, and I was pressured to change their grade. I've been asking for help. And what I documented online, people can find my public resignation letter. I was asking for help since I was a pilot for the this new program, because I was always open to new ideas. You know, I was a teacher who was willing to keep growing and learning and take chances and whatever. So I had piloted it since 2013, and I had documentation from emails going back to 2013 saying, look, this isn't working. We need to do something different here, or we need to do something different here. And there were no answers. There's no documentation of answers in any of the emails. So it was that frustration where I said, oh, and so I said, so basically when they wrote me up, they said, look, you have to follow everything that we say to do. We don't care about your opinion. Your job is to follow our directives. And, if you ever, challenge anything that anyone says, your director or, curriculum assistant superintendent for curriculum, or if you challenge anybody, that's it. You could be dismissed. And I was like, I don't want to teach here on eggshells for the rest of my career. Like, that's crazy. But on top of it, I knew that students supported it. See, they supported me. And so I felt like I'm doing a disservice to students by allowing this to continue. So that was kind of how it led to me being so public about it. And a brief history of it, like those two real large incidents. But there were a number of incidents before all of that I've documented online.
Wow. Can I ask what ended up happening with those 20 kids that didn't turn in their stuff?
Do you know what? I was so low about it all that some kids turned it in late. Some kids may not have turned it in at all. Everybody passed. Like, I wasn't going to push the envelope because I knew they're not going to support me if I fail somebody. And so I didn't even count like what exactly happened. But again, it was that feeling of, I am not doing right by these kids. It's not moral. It's not pedagogically correct. And I don't feel any support from my school district. I can't do this. I can't do this. I've always been somebody that I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm passionate. And I think that's why I've been so successful. That's why kids come back and say, hey, will you, be the teacher that marries us? Or, I had a student last week invite me to her dissertation defense. So she had graduated in 2006. And now she's defending a dissertation in the subject I taught, sociology. And she was like, would you come to my PhD? Because it really started with you and you were great. And that was that's what we teach for, right? And so that only happens with passion and caring and whatever. But the school's not interested in that. They're interested in their model that they've branded and created.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm curious, what do you think are some of the long-term effects that kids will face by being trained under these models?
Yeah. Do you know what? I'm seeing it now. So I was fortunate to, the class that I taught was a dual credit college class. So it counted for college credit. And this is also in relation to the feelings that I had. So the college that I was teaching at said, hey, you're teaching what's considered a college class. They would send me an email every semester. Just a reminder, your class must give a final exam and your class must use our grading scale, which is like 93 to 100 is an A, 92 to 90 is an A minus, etc. I sent that email to my administration. I said, I don't think they realize how far you guys are deviating from this traditional method. And they said, just ignore it. It's fine. As long, if your kids are getting meets and you would translate that to an A, just translate it to what the college sees as an A. And it's fine if you don't really do a final exam. You could just do our final experience and that counts. It wasn't anything like an exam. And the grading wasn't anything like the grading. So I was lucky. The college then said to me, we think you're great. We've seen you teach. We see your syllabus. We've seen the work you do. Why don't you teach adjunct here instead of, I was technically an adjunct already because I was teaching a college class through the college at this high school. But why don't you teach on our campus? So as a college professor now, I'm seeing the, what we've sowed in public education, because kids show up there. Oh, I don't have my paper. Do I have to be here? Do I have to even show up? Do I have to do this work? And colleges, you could ask any faculty. If you go on to like faculty Twitter or professor Twitter or whatever, you'll see all of the teachers that are like, what is going on? Does anybody? And people think it's a result of the pandemic and what kids lost during that time. I think the pandemic made it worse, but it was happening long before the pandemic. And it was this push for, we want to go to this, fancy new grading system. I think just because it's new, I think administrators are looking for ways to make a name for themselves. And so they kind of push it without really thinking through all the repercussions.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Do you think that there's any financial incentives anywhere in all this for anybody?
Big financial incentives. So my school that I taught at was a school leader, and I think deservedly so. Like, our school rose from kind of like a farming community to one of the highest achieving schools in the country. And we had won 3 Blue Ribbon Awards. This is like early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. And Department of Education had like cited us and put us on their website. And they thought, wow, this school's doing great things. And one of the things it did early was it pushed the idea of a PLC, which I'm sure your listeners know about, like professional learning community, where teachers are supposed to collaborate, come up with best practices, get teachers out of their individual silos where it's like, well, no, this is my assignment. I created this and I'm not going to share it. So we did that to a very effectual degree. But what happened was our superintendent then left and created or partnered with a professional development, a private company that does professional development for teachers, consulting, educational consulting. And this is $1 million industry. So you could get contracts where you're consulting with the entire city of Austin, Texas, or the entire state of Arkansas. Like, that's happening. So in order to do that, you have to start coming up with, what's the next best thing? What are we going to do? What are we going to promote? What are we going to sell? And our school became a way for administrators to step into that consulting gig, that consulting level. And so there was incentive to create a brand that we can market, that then I can go out and do. And so, this is hard to talk about because it feels so dishonest, but it's real. So my school was pushing this evidence-based grading in 2012, 2013, 2014. And we were working on it and saying, this isn't working. Like, I don't know about this. And it was very few teachers. I was the only teacher in my department. Then there was like the driver's ed team was doing it, and the arts department was doing it. Super limited. And then they wrote a book, and the book came out in 2014, 2015 about here's how you do this, proficiency-based grading. And then they re-upped the book or revised it or wrote a second one in like 2016 or 2017. And our school wasn't even doing it. Now, in the intro, you had mentioned all the work I had done around the country. So teachers had followed me I had been presenting for 10 years at conferences nationally. I started a Google group for teachers of sociology. So we share, like there's 400 of us, we'll share online. So when teachers heard about me being at Stevenson, they were emailing me and saying, hey, one of your administrators is here telling us that you're grading like this and doing all this. Is that true? Is everybody? And I was like, no, it's not. We're not doing it. Like some of us are, but it kind of keeps changing and it keeps evolving because they're realizing it's not working. So they make up new things. And none of these administrators had taught in the last, let's say, 10 years. And they've never taught the ideas that were in this book. They were all sort of theoretical ideas that they had come up with. And so I had to tell other teachers, yeah, we're not doing it. Like it's dishonest. And so then when I resigned last spring, I got emails from teachers all over the country, Idaho, Oregon, Texas, Iowa, who had said, yeah, your school was here. We tried it. It's awful. Thank you for sharing it publicly. Like the teachers would say, I didn't feel like I could speak out because of the erosion in teacher protection and, the erosion of tenure and things like that. And so they're not speaking out, but it's happening everywhere. And teachers are like, this is crazy. And so I think that's leading to the burnout. The pandemic was hard, but I don't think it was that as much as all of this other stuff going on in the background.
Wow. So what you said is like shocking, but it makes so much sense because there's always this feeling among teachers that so much professional development feels entirely made up, but it's almost like, I hate to use this comparison, but it feels like cult mind control programming because it's just shoved down our throat and we're told it's researched and it's evidence-based and everybody's doing this. And if you try to raise your hand and say, I don't think this is working, then it's like, it's you. And you need to fix it. And it's just such an intense environment. And so, like you said, teachers are really afraid to say anything. And I still remember the professional development where we had these people come in talking about, standards-based grading and how zeros are toxic. And we're just now learning that, the traditional way of like having students fail things for not turning them in and having deadlines, how it's so toxic and it doesn't work. And it's just so ironic because for all of these programs that have been coming out over the last decade, as teachers, we sure don't feel like our students are more proficient in any actual skills. Maybe they can finagle certain things to create a test score, but knowledge-wise, content knowledge-wise, it feels like they don't know anything. Did you kind of have a similar experience?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the data bears it out. So my school publishes its own data. It surveys students senior year and then 1 year after and then 5 years after graduating. That data shows we're at a 10-year low in terms of students. When you ask students, did you feel prepared for college? We've dropped 20 points, maybe more than 20, maybe it's like 27 points. Over the last 10 years, students are saying, yeah, I did not feel prepared for college at all. And it hasn't dropped that much nationally. So it's something about our school, and I think our school has been pushing this grading longer than others. So I see that, and then I see other data when you ask students, and I've posted some of this online too. Oh, you ask teachers, like the University of Chicago, we're in Illinois, and so the University of Chicago does this 5 essential survey that you survey all the schools across the state, and you want to survey parents, students, teachers, and you ask them do you feel like, how are things at your school? Do you feel like you've gotten good professional development? And those scores are down. And so my former school is rated weak on professional learning and professional learning community and like professional development and leadership. But yet our administrators are out telling other schools, hey, we've got the answer to fix your school. And so what I think it is partly there's an echo chamber among, school administrators. And I think other school administrators will say, well, no, this is research-based because somebody over there at that school is doing it. And so, we have evidence that it's being done. But you've got to like trace the evidence. And if you trace it back, you find there isn't really so the way it traces very basically is back to like the 2000 aughts, maybe 2006, 2007. One of the guys on the consulting circuit was Robert Marzano. People are very familiar with him. And he has some good ideas. So my school brought him in and said, well, we want to translate his ideas to our school. Now, Marzano's ideas applied to elementary school, not to high school. They applied to standards-based grading, which is different than evidence-based grading and proficiency-based grading. These are different things, like slight, nuances differently. And schools are sort of throwing it around like this umbrella term and we could just do it. And it doesn't apply like that. But he was part of the consulting gig. He's written books with the administrators at my school. So then my school says, well, now let's take that and rebrand it into our idea of this. Then we can sell it. But if you trace that lineage, there's no data that they have done to create these ideas. And the books aren't peer reviewed. They're not even, so none of this involves like academia, like people that devote their lives to school of education and figuring out the best ways to teach. No, it's being done by administrators who haven't taught in 10 years, who are trying to sell an idea or brand the next big thing so that they can, consult or whatever, publish a book or make a name for themselves. And so it's like this echo chamber then. And then all you have to do is like a school like mine, which it used to call itself a lighthouse school because schools would look to my school and they still do. So for example, my school brings in about 100 teachers a month, maybe more, where they pay for a site visit. They come to our school and they, listen to the principal, they listen to the deans, they listen to the different teams talk. That money that they pay to come there stays within our high school. So that's the incentive for for example, the school board or our high school or the community to be like, hey, look, this gives our school a great reputation. It puts money into our funds that help students who, might need a scholarship or, can't afford lunch or things like that. So it does that there. But what it also does is it brings in hundreds of teachers that then once they leave our school will say, hey, let's follow up with that school. Let's bring in this administrator. Let's bring in this principal and have them talk here. And that's when it becomes like a separate consulting gig. And so the schools sort of say, so when that's happening, you see like a school like Arkansas Department of Education says, well, that school's doing it. And so it's like, it seems like it's researched because they are the school. But then if you go to our school and say, but where'd your research come from? There's nowhere. And this is what's really telling. You want to know? Mm-hmm. So our school put in this idea of grading and they wrote a book about it. They never gave the book to any of us, any teachers, nobody. Wow. What they said is, we will train your department chairs, your directors, and then each team of teachers should work with the director. And so what happens is like the directors have never taught it. They don't really understand it. They don't have the answers because they didn't create it. So within each department, each department is doing stuff differently. Like, for example, like one of the departments has started to allow teachers to have some type of way of taking off students for late work. And I think that's the English department. But social studies is still not doing that. Or other students said, well, my teacher said that if I turn something in late, I get 1 grade lower on the proficiency. So if this would have been meets, because it's late, it's going to be down at approaches, like which is more like a C than an A. And so there's this disparate grading within the school, and nobody really knows what's happening. But people assume it's happening all over. So they just think, oh, well, this is the trend. This is the wave of the future. So I would love to do a deep dive on the history and where this thing came from. I think it's like groups like the ACSD works with, it's like a group for administrators. So they bring in administrators. But these are the administrators at our schools that are doing this. So then other administrators go there and say, well, this group is doing it. This professional development group is doing it. So, but nobody's working with like where they really should be working with it, which is like, who's doing the original research, who's doing the tests, who's doing the vetting, the peer reviews, which should be schools of higher ed. But they're not working with them. Anyway, that's a really long-winded answer, but I think it's an echo chamber where schools hear from other schools and they hear from professional development groups. And so they all think, well, this is what's happening and it's research-based, but it's not.
This is so fascinating, and it's putting together so many pieces for me, because I know, and you, from what I understand, have like an affluent, successful school. I've worked in a lot of low-income schools with at-risk populations. And I think the saddest thing about all of this is this kind of schools that are struggling so hard are looking to the schools that they believe are so successful. And we're getting worse outcomes as a result of this. And it's just all the pieces are fitting together, because it seems like there's a pressure on you guys to really have inflated grades. And that way on the books, it looks like, look, all of these outcomes are being proven. Here's the data, but the data is kind of contrived sometimes, because they're telling you, well, give them a million chances, take, assignments in the summertime, choose kind of the best grades out of the batch. And so this is like nothing short of a scandal in my book. But it makes sense.
It is. You're right. And here's the other thing that people don't realize, right? So yes, my school is super high achieving. And like I said, that kind of started in the 90s. It was an affluent suburb outside of Chicago. So people were moving there and buying big lots, and big houses. So what that meant was, as we know, like America is extremely segregated by social class. And that has to do with local school districts and local school tax dollars and things like that. So if you go on to like the census data, you can search by school district. Our school, the school district that I was at, their average income or median income is $140,000 a year, compared to like the median within America of 67,000, say. So we're almost, more than twice the median. So of course it's going to be high. And we know statistically higher income correlates to higher test scores, for a whole host of reasons, right? But that's exactly why, you're correct, because schools will turn to us like, you guys have the solution. Yeah, you know what the solution is? Get parents that make $500,000 a year to move into your district, right? And then parents who are doctors and lawyers and accountants, get those parents to move into your district. You'll see your scores go up. That's the solution. This is, I know this because students have told me, right? Students in my district will, despite my district, right? Despite the high taxes, despite the, all the things that we're doing, the Lighthouse School, right? There are still students, lots of students who are paying $10,000 a year for college consulting, or, $20,000 for a package where we will help you get into the schools that you want to get into. We will make a 4-year plan. These are the clubs you join. This is, how you write your essay. This is how you study for the ACT, and we will get you into those schools. And so how is some other school going to compete with that? But nobody tells you that when you come to professional development. They say, we're doing this really unique grading. I mean, that's silly, right? Our ACT has gone up every year since I was there, except like 1 year, 2013, it stayed stagnant or something. But from 1999 till when I left last year, 2022, the ACT score had gone up every single year. It had nothing to do with the grading practices of the last 5 years, right? Like, it was going up anyway. And the average income in the district has gone up for all 20 of those years too.
Wow. This makes so much sense. I'm kind of curious how the parents have taken this, because on the one hand, if their kids look great on paper, I could see some of them saying awesome. But on the other hand, for really competitive families that want like maximum GPA points, I could see them being like, hey, wait a second. So how did they react to this?
To the grading, or to my leaving, or?
We'll start with the grading, and then you could tell us about your leaving
Okay.
and how that went.
So with the grading, and then I asked my students, like, because there were some times where we would have a heart-to-heart, because again, I was one of those teachers where we were like, close, and the students trusted me. And I'd say, like, you guys, like, because they'd be complaining about the grading. I'd say, why don't your parents complain? And they basically, the story I got the most often was, my parents can't figure it out. They have no idea. So they've just kind of given up. And as long as the grades that come home are like A's, they're fine. But the ironic thing is, they don't see A's. They only see exceeds, meets, whatever, until the semester report card. So when you're sending these things home that just say, well, you're approaching learning, you're meeting learning, it kind of, like, as a parent, it's kind of like, oh, all right, I don't know, I guess that sounds good, and then as a parent, like, you could ask your kid, like, hey, what's going on? What does this mean? And the kid's like, oh, don't worry. It means I could redo a couple things and my grade will go up. Okay, that's it. You're done. So parents, I think, are simply confused. And that's, again, like an interesting way that they deviated from Marzano and some of the other people that did standards-based grading, where standards would say, like, look, the report card would say, have you been able to write a correct thesis? Have you been able to support it with evidence? Have you been able to explain data? And then you would see, like, as a parent, oh, what's going on with your thesis? How come you can't explain it? But we're not doing that. It's not standards based, because they're not sending home standards. They're sending home like a category, like, how is your writing, or how is your content knowledge? Oh, it's meets, it's approaches. So there's no specifics there as a parent to discuss, So anyway, that's, I think, the biggest thing is parents are confused. And then the other thing is, like, the school has tended to side with parents. So if you raise enough stink about it, then, and you push it, and then eventually, okay, you see, the school placates the parents and lets it go. And then when I left and I put stuff out, like, I got emails from parents saying, oh my God, thank you. I have been complaining about this for 4 years. I got emails from parents. I got emails from students. I got emails from students that were former students, and students that were current students, and students that I never even taught. So, like, one anecdote, which was, amazing. It's like the last week after the letter had went public, after I had raised, everybody, it was a big deal. And I'm walking out of the building at 2:30 when the bell rings, and it's a crowd of people. Some kid is walking by me, and he does like a double take, and he goes, are you that sociology teacher? And I'm like, yeah, it's me. And the kid goes, man, I just want to say thank you. And he put out his hand and he shook my hand and he said, I've been complaining about this for years. Nobody will listen. And, I appreciate you speaking out. Like, that was the type of response I was getting. So it's there, but I think the school is so powerful that, people feel like I can't challenge it. I'm not going to win, or I'm afraid to challenge it because this school has so much control over, does my kid get into the honors classes or the AP classes, or does, so I don't want to use any of my political capital to argue about that. Or the parents are just simply confused. They can't make sense of it. And when you talk to administrators, even if you question it, they'll spin it in a way that, hey, it makes sense. Like, if you go to the school's website, there's some short videos there explaining, well, here's how we explain, and they could explain it in a way that as a parent, you go, oh, okay, that makes sense. But they're not addressing the practical issues that arise, and they're not addressing the real world, issues and grading. They're just explaining it to you in theory, which sounds great in theory,
Wow. This is really fascinating. And I'm amazed at how many dots makes sense. Because then it's, in a way, it's probably from the district's perspective in the school, they're thinking this is a win-win situation, millions of dollars and acclaim and shiny fame for us. And the students will still have good grades on their report card. And if anybody's really bothered, we can fix their little grades in the system and they'll go away and be happy. While all of a sudden, like, all of this is shooting out all over the nation and like infecting other schools, but everyone's having to play the game because the administrators are in the echo chambers and the teachers can't speak out or they're shamed and blamed. Meanwhile, student outcomes are like getting worse and worse and worse. You know, work habits, college, all of that's getting worse. But since like teachers like myself and even you have felt pressure to kind of fudge grades, it's again this thing where it's like this thin veneer of something being good when it's like decaying and rotting on the inside. Like that's just kind of how I put it together. And it makes so much sense now. Cause I just think so, not even just with this, but with so many like modern educational practices, all of us teachers in the back room by the printer, we're talking about this doesn't make any sense. But it's just like, it feels impossible to kind of go up against the machine because of all the reasons you mentioned. So I'm just so thankful that you're telling this story. And this is enlightening for me because it's just, there's just this frustration that it seems like common sense shows that this doesn't work. Students can figure it out. You know, anybody that really looks at it can see like this doesn't work, but yet we're being gaslit all the time, everywhere.
Yeah. And I think I had shared a document with you and it's publicly available too somewhere, but in it, I explained like that gaslighting. It's like, so you put, when I would push the administration, I would say, but what if a kid doesn't turn this in, or what if it doesn't do it? And what then, and eventually they had this line that they would say, well, it's your professional judgment. It ultimately comes down to your professional judgment. And then I would say, but well, what about when my judgment is that the kid should fail? Well, no, you can't do that. Or what about when my judgment is, oh, well, I want to average their grades together because I think that's really the fairest way to do this. No, you can't average. Well, then is it my professional judgment? Like that's like the gaslighting piece, you know? And so it's just sort of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it just becomes so clear what they want. And you, as a teacher, know in the back of your mind, if I fight this and say, doggone it, this kid needs to fail, you're going to catch heck from it. You're going to catch heck from the parents, heck from the students, heck from administration. And it's just, we have this constant calculation going on while feeling bad on the inside, like we are doing wrong things, but we're thinking like, do I really want to die on this hill? And after a while, it just gets exhausting. And then it gets like flat embarrassing when you have a situation like you did where like 20 students are like, I'm not even going to do it. Then you start to feel insulted because it's like I'm pouring out my life as a teacher. And yet these students can't even be bothered to like hand in something that they've had a million chances on. And I think that's where, you know, like the burnout, like you said, is really happening with teachers because we're just feeling undervalued, gaslit. We're feeling like we have to play all of these games. And for people that really care about students, for people that really care about integrity, it starts to eat away, you know, at you on the inside. So what was, if you don't mind sharing, what are some personal impacts that this whole situation has had on you? Because I can tell that you love education and you love your students and you've loved being a teacher. So what has this whole thing been like for you?
Yes, thank you so much. You know, it's having a year now to be removed, you realize, whoa, that like I was in a different place, you know, my mindset, my emotion, the physiology. And so, but it's hard to realize that in the moment. But so looking back, I had, and this is again, all part of the reason why I left. So when those students didn't turn that in and I had gotten upset, at one point there, I was having like these palpitations. And so I went to the nurse and the nurse said, do you have a headache? And I was like, no. And then, so she's doing my blood pressure and she's got the stethoscope on. She's like, are you having any, blurry vision? I was like, no, like what? She's like, what, your blood pressure is at like heart attack or, stroke levels, wow. Like it's like 190 over 110. She's like, that's really dangerous. And I was like, oh my God. No, I didn't know. I know I could feel like the palpitations, but I didn't know it was that. I'm not having any other symptoms. So she said, all right, I want you to, you know, calm down. You know, I'm not going to let you leave the office until you get it down. So I laid down for a while, had some water, my blood pressure went down to 150, but I went to the doctor the next day. Doc said, yeah, you have, even at a resting rate, you are high. We need to get you on some medication. And so that was like one little thing that like, I think it had been itching up. And the other thing is like, so I had like gained weight, like just little by little, like these little things where you just feel like, oh, maybe it's just them getting older, you know? But now with it, taking a step back, I realized it was like this cortisol level of like constantly feeling like stressed. How are these kids going to react? Are they going to do the work? What am I going to say? Will my administration back me? And so the health effects were a huge part of it. But then I also realized now that I'm teaching in this college level where, in a college, none of this stuff seems to be happening. So like at college, they're like, look, you decide what you think kids need to do, and you grade them the way we trust you as a professional, which is how it really should be, right? And so I have already like felt this freedom now for like, oh, how do I want to grade kids? And I feel like I'm unlearning all of these habits that for about 10 years I had been developing and thinking in these mindsets, and and some of it is like, all right, no, there's some good stuff here where I can figure out how to use this in my current teaching and it's valuable. Like just because a kid misses one assignment, I don't want him to fail the class. Like nobody does. I don't know any teacher that's like, yeah, I can't wait to stick it to a kid by giving them a 0. So I'm finding out ways to not penalize them harshly because of a 0, or to make, to make adjustments so that kids can reperform or, learn something that they might have had a bad test. There's ways around that, but it doesn't have to be what my school has done. But I'm like having to like shed all these layers that I had been made to think and believe about not just teaching, but even myself. And so that was another way that I've really noticed like, wow, I had all this stuff piled on me, over the last, years. And so I've changed. So that's one of the effects too. So the health effects, and then also that the teaching effects and the stress levels. So
definitely, you did a great job of describing that, and I'm glad that you still get to be in education. Like that's really encouraging because you still get to do what you love, right? And that's
me too. I mean, I feel like, hey, that was what I was meant to do. I think I do a good job. I certainly feel like devoted to it. And the feedback that I got from so many colleagues was, yeah, this is the school's loss. Like, this is sad that you're leaving. Like, this is really but when people are all saying that, but then your administration is sort of like, well, c'est la vie. Like, what kind of school are you really? Who is it really about? If you're like, the thing that I complained about when I got upset, I didn't get upset in the classroom. I didn't yell at a kid. There was nothing that was student facing. This was only getting upset to, my administration and saying, this is not right, And so who do they really care about? And if I could plug this, there's a fantastic book coming out that I think you might've read about this, but CJ Pascoe, sociologist, has spent years in high schools studying, at first it was sort of masculinity in high schools and how that's created, but then it became how schools are participating in the politics of protection, in which a school says, well, wait, we're going to just protect everybody's right. And really what they're doing is protecting the status quo, as opposed to the politics of care, which is that, well, wait, we want to really help the people that need it the most. And so when a school says, look, we don't care if you're leaving as a teacher or, we're going to get rid of you or what, all that stuff, but it's because the admin doesn't like your opinion, but yet you're having an amazing impact on kids. Kids are thanking you and going to college because of you and getting PhDs, and like, who are you really protecting? Like, what is your interest? And so that shines a light on it even more.
Wow. I'm curious what you would tell to new teachers that are either in the classroom right now or going into education and they're thinking this is crazy. Like, what would you tell them? Because I sure don't know what to tell them.
Okay. So here's a number of things. So one is, I think in general, this is the I forget what you call it, but like the mountaintop view, right? Looking down. Things are always cyclical in education, especially. Like I've seen it, I was teaching in 1996, I was student teaching. And so you see trends kind of come and go in the next wave. And so it's gonna change, I think. I just don't know when. I don't know what it'll change to, but it won't be permanent. So if you're passionate about teaching and you like it, like, stick with it and just see it through, right? But also do your best. Like you are still the force in that classroom. All of the sad thing is like all of these policies and things that admin does, whatever, students never sit directly in front of it. They sit in front of you, right? So you're the force. So if you can close your door and make that room as good of a learning environment as possible, and connect with kids, right? That's the most meaningful thing that you can do. And you can take that away with you every day when you leave. And I think for me, the problem was I had gotten to the point where like students complained about their grades and it rose to the level of admin's attention. So now I was in this position where I had to address it with admin and I couldn't just close my classroom door and work with it within the classroom, But I think for the majority of teachers, if it doesn't get to that level, like, you can still have that impact. And then the last thing is, I think that in the end, sometimes as teachers, we want to believe that what we do, like, how can a kid not turn in this final paper and what are they going to become in life if they leave my class? And, and the reality is like, you're just one class and it might be just one assignment. So focus on the kids that are turning it in. And, I think no matter what kind of grading system you create, there's going to be kids that are like, I'm not motivated. I don't want to do it. Maybe these are kids that are crying out for help. And I think, like you said, like sometimes kids need to fail because that's their way of saying like, this isn't working for me. And it might be something in their personal life that we don't know as teachers. So if you can focus on the kids that are taking what you're giving them and soaking it up and focus on that, because, those kids need you, will remember you, etc. And some kids, it doesn't matter what you're going to do. It's going to be hard to reach them because they're, that old Zen saying, like when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and not every student is ready. And I don't think we can put it on every teacher to make that kid ready, right? Their world is too big. They've been shaped by too many outside forces, family life, community, whatever's happening, etc.
Amazing. So inspiring. This has been an incredible interview. So good. And I just still have so much to think about. I feel like I've learned so much just in this interview. My mind is blown. I thought I'd heard it all, but wow.
Let's do part two. We'll do part two sometime.
Anytime. Well, thank you so much, Chris. And I know that this is going to be so impactful for so many people. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all your work.
All righty. We'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.